Okay, good morning.
Good
I'm
morning.
ready to start. Okay. Had a shorter commute this morning, so I hope everybody made it to the phone safely. And hopefully by next week, I can say that the snow will be melted, but who knows the way the winter's been going. We never know what they're going to dump on us
Yeah,
next. So, okay,
yeah.
uh, take it in stride. Hope everyone is safe and warm and dry. Okay, so this week our topic is Purim because that's what's on the agenda. Next week there will not be a class because it will actually be Purim on Tuesdays. So Purim, of course, is a one-day holiday. Unlike Hanukkah, we have to pack it all in for one day. The laws of Purim are mostly pretty straightforward, and they're not terribly complicated. There's primarily four mitzvahs that we do on Purim, mostly focused on Purim Day. That's something which gets a little bit uh, fallen by the wayside to some extent. Is I guess just for pragmatic reasons. Sometimes people get focused on Purim night. It's a practical time for communal events. But it is true that there is a mitzvah to read the Megillah at night, as there is during the day. Those two mitzvahs are equal. Once at night and once during the day. The other three mitzvahs are all done exclusively during the day. And those are the mitzvahs of Mishloach Manos, Matanos Lavyonim, and the Suda. Right? So, again, the four mitzvahs of Purim, one of them is reading the Megillah, which we do once at night and once during the day. The other three mitzvahs are exclusively during the daytime hours. Mishloach Manos means sending gifts of food to others, which means at least two foods to at least one person. Matanos Lavyonim, gifts to the poor, that's gifts of charity. That's at least one gift each to two poor people. And again, it has to take place on Purim Day. That can be accomplished indirectly, I could say remotely. So we don't necessarily all have the ability to visit a poor person on Purim and give them money, but there are organizations that will do it for you. Local rabbis can often take care of it. We have the ability to send the money online. The main thing is to make sure to do it through an agency that guarantees you that it will be taken care of on Purim Day. And of course, there's a Suda, which is the festive meal, which doesn't have any very specific guidelines. Unlike the Seder, it doesn't have a lot of rules and steps, but you are supposed to have a special festive meal to celebrate Purim. Again, it has to be during the day. It can continue on into the night, which it often does, but it needs to start before sunset. You need to be able to eat some of it while it's still daytime, and that's pretty much the guidelines for Purim. There's, of course, a fast the day before Purim, the fast of Esther. Occasionally, the fast is not the day before Purim. That can occur if Purim is, let's say, on a Sunday. The fast will be obviously rescheduled to a different day. So we're not going to fast on Shabbos. There is let's see. Look at a couple of laws that pertain to some of the things we discussed. Okay, so because of the fast of Esther, obviously, people are fasting, and even when the fast is technically over, we still have to hear the Megillah. So we don't delay unnecessarily, but we do wait to read the Megillah until nightfall, so there is a little bit of a gap between the time that one could theoretically eat till the time that one can actually eat. Of course, if a person is attending a later Megillah reading, it is permissible to have some refreshments beforehand. If someone's going to read the Megillah if you're at 11:30 p.m., you don't have to fast until then. Ideally, of course, you'd want to hear the Megillah as soon as possible at nightfall, and than to eat after the Megillah is finished. We know, of course, this is not practically relevant to most of us this year, although there may be some exceptions. I assume the people who are listening to the class now are all in America and going to observe Purim like I will on Tuesday, of course, if Mashiach comes. We may all find ourselves in Israel and observing Purim on a different day. But even today, we know the rule is there are certain locations where Purim is observed a day later. This year, that would be Wednesday. And that refers to walled cities. And the rationale was that, as we read in the Megillah, Purim really commemorates the day that the Jews finished taking care of their enemies. Right? It's not the day that Haman was hung, which was actually, I believe, on the second day of Pesach. Some people have a custom to eat some special extra food on the second day of Pesach to commemorate the party that Esther made for the king, at which she denounced Haman and caused him to be hung. That happened on the second day of Pesach, almost a year before. It's almost a month from now, which means that it was 11 months before the actual events of Purim. As we know, and if you follow the chronology carefully in the Megillah, Haman promulgated his decree it was during the month of Nisan, which is, again, next month in the Jewish calendar. Haman scheduled the extermination of the Jews for Adar, which is 11 months later. Mordechai insisted to Esther that she had to go to the king immediately, not delay, despite the many months that were still yet to pass before the decree was supposed to be fulfilled. He said, you have to act immediately. So she fasted for 3 days and immediately went to the king, invited him to a party. He asked her what she wanted at the party, and she said, come to another party. And that second party, which was the following day, was the day that she revealed her identity and revealed what she was doing this for, and the king had Haman hung on the gallows, and that was second day of Pesach. So what happens then, as if you read the Megillah, is that the king, Esther and Mordechai, plead with the king that eliminating their enemy was not enough. There was still this decree of extermination against the Jews, and the king decides to change the rules of the game, so to speak, and instead of giving government support for the Jews to be wiped out, he gave the government, I guess you would say, the political will now encourage the Jews to defend themselves against their enemies. And when the war happened, the anti-Semites still attacked the Jews, but they were now the minority, and they were on the losing end. And the Jews, who now had the favor of the king and the admiration of a large majority of the population, now succeeded at destroying those people who wanted to destroy them. And when the battle was finished, that was the day of Purim, 14th of Adar, which is what we commemorate this Tuesday. The Megillah recounts how Esther asked for yet another favor for the king, and she said, in the city of Shushan, the capital city, where the palace took place, and a lot of the story plays out, really all the story plays out, she said, there's a hotbed of anti-Semites, Jew haters, and we'd like to have an extra day to finish the job, and the king grants that, so the battle lasts for one more day. And therefore, their battle is over one day later. And so, again, the commemoration of the conclusion of the battle, when there's finally peace and respite from the enemies, happens a day later on the 15th of Adar. The rabbis wanted to commemorate that, and therefore to give a special status to the city of Shushan, and people who live there should celebrate Purim a day later. But I guess they figured that, and, as we see, Shushan, I don't even know if it was then, but it's certainly not now a hotbed of Jewish society. So they decided that any walled city should, if it was walled from ancient times, should observe, like Shushan, the 15th day of Adar, to commemorate the miracle that happened in Shushan, the walled city, where the battle lasted an extra day. They added to the list Jerusalem, although Jerusalem was not a walled city in ancient times. I'm sorry, one second, let me just I'm sorry. Let me take that back. What happened was they wanted to commemorate the special status of Shushan because of what happened there, and they would have set the parameter that any city ruled at that time, like Shushan, would commemorate on the 15th day. However, at that time the Jews were in exile, and the cities of Israel were not walled cities because many of them were desolate. They were left with the problem that would give a preferred status to the cities outside of Israel, and it would be an insult to the cities of Israel. So therefore they said the rule will be not based on which cities have walls now, but which cities had walls in the days of Yeshua ben Yeshua, the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu, who led the Jews into Israel. If a city had a wall back then, it has the same status as Shushan and observes Purim on the 15th day. Except for Shushan itself, of course, which did not have a wall at the time, but that was the whole reason for the rule in the first place. So, of course, in the city of Shushan, you have to observe Purim on the 15th day. So that's the rule. So it comes down to a kind of complex situation, but basically, practically speaking, if you're in Israel and you are in the city of Jerusalem, you will read the Megillah and observe Purim on the 15th day. We call it Shushan Purim, the Purim of Shushan, because that was the reason we had the extra day. And even outside of Israel, we commemorate, we leave out the Tachanan prayer, which we generally omit on slightly festive days. And so there is a kind of 2-day dual holiday, although in any particular place, you're only going to be observing Purim on one day or the other. Okay, so that's as far as the date and time of Purim. There's a lot of discussion, again, not really relevant if you live here, but it could certainly happen in Israel. Actually, I experienced this once when I was visiting Israel. You can start the day in one city and drive to another city. So I started Purim in Bnei Brak and then took a bus to Jerusalem. You might end up hearing the Megillah 4 times. Again, it depends on when you are aware, your intention and your itinerary. But again, that's not something relevant if you're not living in Israel. When an even more complex situation can occur if it happens on Shabbos. The 14th of Adar, the Purim, the worldwide Purim never falls on Shabbos according to the current calendar that we use. But the 15th, the Shushan Purim, can sometimes occur on Shabbos, and when that happens, there's a whole complicated arrangement of how Purim is scheduled. Purim is not really observed on Shabbos, but the different components of the day, the Megillah reading and the feast and the Shari are all given a different. Some is done on Friday and some is done on Sunday, so they have an interesting, they call it Purim Mishulash, a 3-day Purim. They spread the different observances of Purim over 3 days. Okay. As far as the mitzvah of Purim, everybody is supposed to participate in hearing the Megillah, men, women, even children, when they're old enough to be educated. Like with other mitzvahs, we educate them according to their level of understanding. Of course, it says they have to be at least a level of understanding to be quiet in shul, and not to serve other people. In general, the rule is that children are educated based on their ability to receive the education. So 6 or 7 is the default age for understanding basic things. Certain things can start even earlier, 3, 4. The idea of, don't do that. We don't eat that, or we don't turn on that light because it's Shabbos. Things that involve some understanding, they usually say 6 or 7. Some things are even a more advanced age, like a mourning for Jerusalem, observing some of the customs of the 3 weeks and the 9 days. You might need to be more like 10 years old. But again, it's a practical guideline based on the purpose is to educate. That a child under bar bat mitzvah is not obligated on mitzvahs, but the parent is obligated to train them so that when they do become obligated, that they're trained and not just know what to do, but they've developed the right habits. It's very hard to tell somebody to just start practicing anything cold turkey, so to speak. And the more Chavetz makes this point about the laws of Lashon Hara, to something which is particularly challenging even for adults, and it requires good habits. You have to start forming those habits young. That's what education is really about. It's about making sure that they have the right attitudes and the right ideas. So that requires a receptive audience who can at least understand on some basic level what it is that they're doing and what you want them to do. Okay. And again, the mitzvah is not to read the Megillah, but to hear the Megillah. Obviously, that is what the vast majority of us will be doing, hearing rather than reading the Megillah. And even the one who reads it, reading is simply one way of hearing the Megillah and a way of enabling other people to hear the Megillah. The reader, again, it's really anyone who's fulfilling the mitzvah needs to make 3 brachas. If someone's reading the Megillah, they'll usually be the one to make the 3 brachas, and they are Asher Kiddushana b'mitzvah v'tvanu al mikra Megillah, which is the basic format of any bracha on any mitzvah that we make. We bless Hashem, we thank Hashem for the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. And the second mitzvah is Sha'asan Yisum La'alosim Leinim Nehem Azman Hazeh, the one who performed miracles for our ancestors in those days and this time. That's the only other time we make that bracha is on Hanukkah when we light the menorah, but these are the 2 rabbinic holidays, and they both commemorate miracles that occurred, and we make a special blessing about the miracle. And the third blessing is a Shehecheyanu, which we make anytime there's something that we do or have or experience from time to time, and it's a celebration that we've lived long enough to experience it again. So whether it's new clothing, some people say, in certain cases, new foods, although that's a little bit debatable today since we typically have access to any food at any time. But anything like that makes a shehecheyanu. And certainly any holiday that comes only once a year, we thank Hashem for giving us the ability to live through the year and to celebrate the holiday again. These 3 brachas are made twice. All 3 of them are made at night, and then once again, all 3 of them are made the next morning when we read the Megillah. There's certain things, when we have a holiday like Sukkot, and we have the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, or the mitzvah of shaking the lulav, we only make the bracha shehecheyanu once. Actually, we make it twice, but once on the first night of Sukkot, when we sit in the sukkah for the first time, and it's also a general blessing for the holiday that's come around again. The second time is the next morning when we shake the lulav for the first time, or if it's the first day of Sukkot Shabbos, we don't shake the lulav. So the second day of Sukkot, we shake the lulav for the first time, we make a shehecheyanu. But again, each time the shehecheyanu was made once for something that's new. And even though the holiday of Sukkot lasts for 7 days, we only make the shehecheyanu once at the beginning of the holiday, once on the lulav. We make it again when we get to the end of the holiday, Shmini Atzeres, because that's considered a new holiday. It's the 8th day, but it's really a separate holiday. On Pesach, we make a shehecheyanu once on the first night at the first Seder, and then after that, we make it twice because the general guideline that we outside of Israel, we're observing everything twice. We're doing double vision on all the holidays because of the uncertainty of the calendar that existed at a certain point in history. So we just repeat everything the second night. So we really are only making the shehecheyanu once, but we're doing it twice because we're redoing the entire day. So on the second night, we make a shehecheyanu a second time, but it's really just that first shehecheyanu being repeated in case this second night is the real night, in case the calendar is one day off. But after that, the shehecheyanu is not repeated for the rest of Pesach. Same thing with Hanukkah, we make a shehecheyanu on the first night that we light the menorah, but not after that. With Purim, though, we make the shehecheyanu twice, both when we read the Megillah at night, and then again when we read the Megillah during the day. It is. It's not the only reason that we make the shehecheyanu twice. It's actually a debate. The Shulchan Aruch actually says not to make a shehecheyanu again during the day, but the Ramah, the one that's followed generally by the Ashkenazi community, said to make the shehecheyanu during the day as well, and that's because the primary mitzvah to hear the Megillah is actually during the day. Although again, there's a mitzvah both night and day. It's, I guess, a bigger or more central mitzvah. I guess that would mean I'm not going to offer a halachic ruling, but if one could only hear the Megillah one time, I guess the day would be preferable. One thing we do know is that all the other mitzvahs, as I mentioned before, the mitzvah, the Purim feast, gifts to the poor, and the gifts of food to friends, are only during the day. So in general, that's consistent with the idea that the day is the primary observance. What is true is for sure is that they always announce in the shul that when we make that Shehecheyanu on Purim morning, we are, again, ideally supposed to consciously have the intention that Shehecheyanu also covers the other mitzvahs we'll be doing during the day. Again, those three other mitzvahs, the Seudah, the Shloch Manos, and the Tanos Levyonim. So that explains the idea of the dual Shehecheyanu. And the Megillah during the day can be read at any time. But, you'll typically have readings that take place during the day, during the Shachris service, and ones that take place at the last minute, as people are sitting down to eat or to conclude the Seudah. Someone may walk in and need a Megillah reading, and sometimes you have one in the middle of the day. It's a good idea not to wait till the last minute. Okay. So those are some of the basics. I don't know if there's anything that I left out that people are wondering about. You can feel free to ask now or later after the class. But if there are no other questions, we can move on to talking about the story of Purim for a bit. And of course, it's a long story. Even if we just wanted to tell the events of the story, we could take a while to go through all the details. The Megillah itself is quite a long book. When you read it, it gets read multiple times, especially if there are second readings during shul and after shul. It really does. You get struck by how much text there is in the Megillah. Not a very short story. As one of the things that you begin to realize as you get older is it's also chronologically not a very compact story. The events take place over the period of a number of years. And that's one of the significant parts about Purim, is that, as we know, the story represents what we call a hidden miracle, meaning something that doesn't overtly violate the laws of nature, in which Hashem's hand is hidden, so to speak. That's not just incidental, because, as we know, the story of Purim takes place. It's the only holiday that really commemorates. It wouldn't be accurate to say it's the only holiday that commemorates events that happen outside of Israel, because Passover, obviously, and Shavuos for that matter, and Sukkot for that matter, all commemorate events that happen outside of Israel. But I guess you could say they commemorate events that happened when the Jews were in exile, by which we mean the events of the biblical holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, were really the events that form the formation of the Jewish people. And as we know, our forefathers lived in Israel, and as we know, Hashem gave Abraham Avinu the prophecy that his children would have to be enslaved in a foreign land, but they would eventually be redeemed and brought back to Israel with great wealth and become Hashem's chosen nation. And that's what the holidays commemorate, that process of redemption. And as the Torah describes, Egypt was the furnace, the smelting fire that purified us and made us into the substance that was suitable to become Hashem's treasured nation. And so that's a triumphant process. But the events of Purim, on the other hand, take place when the Jews have been driven out of Israel. So it's a period in history when things have gone in the wrong direction. The Jews have not lived up to their mission, and for that reason are no longer privileged to be in the land of Israel. Again, it's not because it's because of our failings, really. And even the Hanukkah story, as we know, when we talk about the exiles of the Jewish people, putting aside the Egyptian exile, we have 4 periods of exile. One is the Babylonian exile, by the rivers of Babylon. That's after the destruction of the first temple, when the first Tisha B'Av occurs, when the Nebuchadnezzar and his armies destroy the temple and exile the Jews. From the Babylonian Empire, they pass into the control of the Persian Empire, which takes over, overwhelms the Babylonian Empire. That's when the story of Purim takes place. And the Persians eventually, after the Purim story, subsequent to those events, the Jews are allowed to return to Israel and rebuild the temple. And it is during that period when the Jews are back in Israel that eventually the Persian Empire is destroyed and taken over by the Greeks under Alexander. And it's after the death of Alexander where you have the various Greek dynasties that the miracle of Hanukkah takes place. But that's while the Jews are actually in Israel and there is a temple standing. And then, of course, you have the successful victories of the Maccabees, and then war, disintegration until the Romans take over, and that's the current exile that we're in now. So the story of Purim is after the destruction of the first temple, but before the Jews are allowed to return and build a second temple. As a matter of fact, part of the backstory of the Megillah, and this is mentioned in the Targum, which is the ancient Aramaic translation and commentary of the Megillah, based on traditions that we have from the Midrash, that there had been an initial attempt and permission actually granted by the Persian king to allow the Jews to rebuild the temple even prior to the events of Purim, but those attempts were abolished after the efforts of Haman and his cohorts, that they convinced the king to rescind permission for the Jews to build the temple. So not only Jews were in exile, but they actually had received the good tidings that they could begin the process of redemption, then it was taken away. Obviously not a high point for Jewish history. And all the events of Purim take place in that context, and what basically happens is that the Jews are almost destroyed and then they aren't. So it's not as though they suddenly get something. Basically what they get is not being destroyed. So one can look at the events of Purim as a narrow escape. Thank goodness we weren't killed, and because there's no overt miracles, one can simply say, okay, that was a close call. But of course, the rabbis didn't see it that way. They said this was a miracle, and it's a miracle because not of any one piece of the puzzle, but because of the whole picture. The French Impressionists created this style of painting where they made a bunch of dots of color paint, a bunch of splotches on the canvas. When you look at it from enough of a distance, you see a picture. It's impressionistic. When you look at the events of Purim, there's nothing in there that violates the laws of nature in any way. Esther was a beautiful woman. The king had a temper. Haman had an ego. Mordechai was politically savvy. And many different events. I mean, look at politics today. It's certainly dramatic, and there are wild swings back and forth. Look at the fortunes of the Jews. There are plenty of unbelievable events in history. The rabbi said, look at the big picture, and if your eyes are open and your heart is open, then you will recognize this as a miracle. And it's the hidden hand of Hashem. That being the case, the task, the mission of internalizing the lessons of Purim requires us to use that extra effort to see the hand of Hashem. And we know that even you think the most miraculous of miraculous events, and that's the splitting of the Red Sea. We say it every day in the Pesukei de Zimra that we recite from the section from the Torah, the Song of the Sea that the Jews recited after they crossed the Red Sea. When we preface it, we include in our reciting of the song, we include the previous two verses of the Torah, the intro to the song, where it says that Hashem saved the Jews on that day. They crossed the sea and they saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, and they saw the mighty miracles that Hashem had performed, and they experienced fear of Hashem, and they believed in Hashem, and they sang the song. And the rabbis pick up on this, and they say the Jews at that point, first of all, even if you just read the Hebrew words, it says they had fear of Hashem and they had belief in Hashem, which sounds backwards, right? You can't fear Hashem before you believe in Hashem. The rabbis go even further than that, and they say the Jews purified their hearts, and they reached a spiritual level that they had the privilege of the prophetic insight to be able to sing the song. It sounds not what you would expect when someone just watched a sea split open and then they walked through and they watched their enemies drown, you would think that what happens next is they burst out into a spontaneous expression of joy. And apparently that's not what happened at all. First comes fear of Hashem, then comes belief in Hashem, and then they reach some kind of spiritual plateau, and then Hashem gives them some kind of gift of being able to sing the song. And what, as our teachers explained to us, this was a very conscious and very intentional process and not something that happened by itself. Obviously, when the Jews experience these events, the fear of Hashem, that to some extent is natural, right? These miracles are overwhelming, and as we know, fear of Hashem on a low level is simply, Hashem is very powerful, and I wouldn't want to get him angry with me, but that's a very, very lowest and least admirable level. On the highest level, it's Hashem is so great and so noble and so perfect that the last thing I would want to do is to fall short of his expectations for me, or to be in any way disrespectful. That level of fear is never automatic, never happens by itself. It requires focus. It requires a conscious decision to internalize, because it's quite possible to go through the events. Maybe you'll feel the first level of fear. Wow, this is a powerful God who can, I wouldn't want to get him angry with me about that. Then you shrug it off and life goes on. Certainly the feeling of reverence and awe does not happen by itself, or certainly wouldn't last. And if we say that from that the Jews were led to belief, it's obvious that the belief that we're referring to is not, again, the simple belief that there is a God, because quite obviously the sea split because there's a God. That doesn't take much accomplishment to recognize. So the belief here was referring to something much more profound. As we know, even Avraham Avinu, even when Hashem spoke to him and gave him the prophecy of the destiny of his children, it says that he believed in Hashem, and Hashem gave him credit for that while he was talking to Hashem. So the belief that we're referring to is a deep faith that penetrates a person's heart, that even in a conversation with Hashem is not something that necessarily happens by itself. We can all believe in our minds, we have some knowledge, but to really recognize Hashem's presence and Hashem's truthfulness, and to have an absolute faith that what Hashem says will be true and will be true forever, come what may, and regardless of the statistical odds, no matter what Hashem promises, I can be absolutely certain that that is what will unfold before my eyes. That's something which, even for Avraham Avinu, the master of faith, founder of our faith, it doesn't come automatically and you get credit for it. That's the kind of faith the Jews reached after they crossed the sea, after they experienced fear of Hashem, and they climbed to a level of belief in Hashem, which they too got credit for, and the credit that they got resulted in the privilege of being able to sing this incredible song that we repeat today, not because it was a spontaneous expression